So first I'm going to tell you the thing that really happened in my life, and then I'm going to make it a story about racism. So in my own real life, my husband and I have been married about a year, and we moved out to Baltimore so I could finish up my PhD at Hopkins. And we bought our first freestanding house. When I think back on it, I guess he really knew it was going to take me a long time. But anyway. So we bought our first, cute little house with a big wraparound porch with flower boxes dotted all on the porch. And we bought this house in October, so that's really not the time to plant. But when spring came, my husband, who loves to garden, ran out. He was going to decorate our porch with flowers. And then he ran back in because he said, some of these boxes have dirt in them, but some of these boxes are empty. Let me go down to the gardening store. So he goes down to the gardening store and he hauls back big old bags of potting soil. And so we fill up the empty boxes, and then we take equal numbers of our marigold seeds and we put them in, the boxes, and we water them all. And I am not the gardener in the family, so by this time I'm exhausted, right? So I'm just going to sit back and be delighted. 3 weeks later, I'm walking out of my front door, and as I passed our flower boxes on the porch, I literally stopped in my tracks because what I saw made me think that we had planted completely different species in some boxes versus others. Because some of the boxes were full of plants, and they were tall, vigorous looking plants. And some of the boxes just had a few plants in them, and they were scrawny and scraggly looking. And then I realized what had happened. That potting soil that my husband had bought turned out to be rich, fertile soil. So that every single seed planted in the rich, fertile soil has sprouted. The strong seed had grown very tall and vigorous, and even the weak seed had made it halfway up. But that old soil that we had found there turned out to be poor, rocky soil. So the weak seed planted in the poor, rocky soil just died, and even the strong seed in the poor, rocky soil struggled to make it to a middling height. So some of you guys are nodding, so maybe you're some gardeners here, maybe you composted half of your garden, and maybe you've seen this image with your own real eyes. The image is clearly about the importance of the soil, the importance of the environment. But now we're going to take that image and we're going to make it a story about racism by introducing the gardener. So now we're going to have a gardener who has 2 flower boxes, one which she knows to have rich, fertile soil, and one which she knows to have poor, rocky soil. And she has seed for the same kind of flowers, except some of the seed is going to produce pink blossoms and some of the seed is going to produce red blossoms, and the gardener prefers red over pink. So what does? She takes the red seed, she puts it in the rich, fertile soil, pink seed in the poor, rocky soil. 3 weeks later in her boxes, she sees what I saw in mine. In that rich, fertile soil, all the red seed is sprouted, strong red seed, tall and vigorous, weak red seed makes it halfway up. In the poor, rocky soil, the weak pink seed has died. Here comes the strong pink seed struggling to make it to a middling height. And then in those 2 flower boxes, those flowers go to seed. And the next year, the same thing happens. And then those flowers go to seed. And year after year after year after year, the same thing happens. So finally, about 10 years later, gardener's looking at her flower boxes and she says, I was right to prefer red over pink. So we interrupt the story there to say the first part of the story is how institutionalized racism works, where you have the initial historical injustice of the separation of the seed into the 2 types of soil, you have contemporary structural factors of the flower boxes keeping the soil separate, and then through inaction in the face of need, perpetuation of the inequity. But let's pick the story back up to say, well, where is personally mediated racism in this garden? Well, the gardener's looking over at red, thinking red is beautiful, and then she looks at the pink flowers and she says, ooh, those pink flowers sure are scrawny and scraggly, so she plucks off the pink blossoms before they can even go to seed. Or maybe she notices that a pink seed has grown into the rich, fertile soil, so she plucks it out before it can establish itself, which is some of the anti-affirmative action stuff that goes on. And where would internalized racism be in the garden? Well, the red flowers are just living their lives, enjoying being red, many of them not acknowledging or maybe even understanding that they're benefiting from enriched soil. The pink flowers are looking over at red, thinking red is mighty fine and wishing with all their hearts that they too could be red. And here come the bees, minding their own business, collecting nectar, but of course pollinating at the same time. So here comes a bee into one of the pink flowers, and to another pink flower, and to this pink flower, and this flower is like, get away from me, bee! Don't bring me any of that pink pollen, I prefer the red. Because the pink flower has internalized that red is better than pink. So now the question arises, what do we do to set things right in this garden? Well, we could start out by addressing the internalized racism. So we can go over to the pink flowers and we can say, pink is beautiful, power to the pink. And that is an important intervention. It is. But if that's all we do, it's not going to change the situation in which they find themselves. So you might say, okay, well, let's address the personally mediated racism. Let's have a conversation with the gardener, or better yet, let's have a workplace multicultural workshop. Which is all good. So we have our workshop. In the workshop, we say, dear gardener, would you please stop plucking those pink flowers? And maybe she will, and maybe she won't. But even if she does, it's still not going to change the situation in which the pink flowers find themselves. If we really want to set things right in the garden, we need to address the institutionalized racism. So we need to either break down the boxes and mix up the soil, or if you want to keep separate boxes, that's all right too, although it makes it easier for the gardener to keep segregating resources going forward. But if you keep separate boxes, what it means is that you need to enrich that poor rocky soil until it is as rich as the rich fertile soil. And when you do that, the pink flowers will flourish. They'll be looking beautiful, grand, and glorious. So that in that intervention on the institutionalized racism, you'll also have addressed the internalized racism. Because pink won't be looking over at red, thinking red is better, or wanting to be red. And in the intervention on the institutionalized, you may also address the personally mediated racism. Now, the original gardener may have to go to her grave preferring red over pink. But her children who grow up and see the flowers equally beautiful would be less likely to have that kind of attitude. So the story's meant to illustrate those three levels and to strongly suggest that if we want to set things right in the garden, we need to at least address the institutionalized. Good to address all levels at the same time, but at least address the institutionalized, and when we do, the other levels may take care of themselves. But there's a very important question that I haven't raised yet, which is who is the gardener? After all, the gardener is the one that I gave the power to decide, the power to act, and control of resources, which are the elements of self-determination. Who's the gardener? Well, government is a huge part of the gardener, but not the only part. Media, foundations, corporations, maybe UCSF can be its own gardener. But whoever the gardener is, it is dangerous when the gardener is allied with one group. I painted her red, that's why she prefers red over pink. And it's also dangerous when she's not concerned with equity, when she can look at her flower boxes and think her garden is beautiful, thank you, because she's not even counting the pink flowers as part of her garden. So the question is, what do we do to set things right? With the gardener, what do we do about the gardener? Do we make the gardener striped or polka dotted or fuchsia? Do the pink flowers have to recruit their own gardener? Lots of questions that can come out of this. I'm going to just share with you two other questions, and I don't know if we're supposed to finish at 10 or 10, 10. 10? 10. Okay, so may I just give you two questions, and then I just have a little bit more that I can do speed. I can do the rest of it speed. Okay? One question that I loved so much that I tell it now every time. And that is, bye you guys, I know some people have to leave, so. The question is, excuse me, Dr. Jones, why should the red flowers share their soil? And I love that question because it showed me the power of this story to start conversations on racism that might be otherwise difficult if we were talking about racism between you and me. My answer to that question, why should the red flowers share their soil, is that actually that soil doesn't belong to the red flowers. It belongs to the whole garden. We could have a whole discussion on that. But here's another question. What if that's not the original gardener that we're looking at? What if that's the gardener's great-great-great-great-grandchild? Here we are. And that great-great-great-great-grandchild has always seen the flowers looking like that, may not even think there's a problem to be solved. So quickly, three things. The first is we must make the differences in the height and vigor of the pink and red flowers a problem requiring urgent solution. And you know what's going to have to back us up in making that a problem requiring urgent solution? Our deep understanding that the pink and the red seed were for the same kind of flowers. We have to reject any notion of biological determinism in what we see there. Right. But so now that we've made that an agenda item, what do we do, right? Because people have been trying. The second part of the answer is we must make those flower boxes transparent. We need to be talking about the differences in the quality of the soil, as opposed to saying to the pink flowers, reach for the sun. We need to look and see where they are, right? And then the third part is, as we make those flower boxes transparent, we need to make sure that everybody understands that the pink seed did not just go launch themselves into that poor rocky soil. So we need to talk about history, and we need to talk about how the gardener's initial preference for red over pink set up the whole situation, right? How what some people call cultural racism, or what we need to call out as white supremacist ideology in our setting, set up the whole situation. Because if we don't, my story for a long time was just about the quality of the soil, until I realized one day in the telling that even if we were to compel that gardener to enrich the poor rocky soil until it was as rich as the rich fertile soil, if we were to compel her to do that today, but if she continued to prefer red over pink, she would continue to privilege red over pink going forward. So when I defined racism as a system of both structuring opportunity and assigning value, we actually have to pay attention to both aspects of that. Okay. So I mean, this is going to be speed now. I'm going to just rev up.